As night fell, the streets of Detroit were heavy with a suffocating air, as if the once glorious city was slowly exhaling, waiting for the cover of darkness. The decaying buildings stood like ghosts in the shadows, with only the occasional flicker of a lonely neon light casting brief flashes of light on the street corners. The city, once thriving with the booming auto industry, had long since faded into history, leaving behind only silence and decay. On the outskirts of this crumbling metropolis stood an old Gothic mansion, as aged as the city itself. Thick vines crept up its walls, almost completely shielding it from the outside world. The porch was covered in a web of ivy, as if time itself had woven a net around the house, capturing every moment from the past. Inside, Adam sat in his music room, surrounded by antique instruments. His fingers gently brushed the keys of a 19th-century grand piano, the notes echoing softly in the room like a melody left unfinished. His eyes were hollow and deep, as though they could pierce through the walls of the house, through the city, reaching memories buried hundreds of years ago. As an immortal musician, Adam had witnessed countless changes over the centuries. His music had inspired Bach, accompanied Chopin's thoughts, and left its mark on the waves of modern rock. But as time passed, Adam grew weary of the modern world and its loneliness. He stopped creating, rarely connecting with the outside, and only in the stillness of night did he use music to soothe his time-worn soul. But tonight, the silence was shattered by a sudden jarring ring. Adam paused, his fingers stilling on the keys, and turned his gaze to the old dusty telephone. The sound of the ring cut through the empty space, almost as if it were calling out to him. After a moment of hesitation, he slowly walked over to the phone, a sense of anticipation stirring within him. As he lifted the receiver, a voice, both familiar and distant, echoed in his ear. It was Eve's voice, warm and tinged with mystery, as if it had traveled across time itself to reach him. Adam. Eve's voice was soft and comforting. I'm back. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. Adam's heart raced as he closed his eyes, trying to calm himself. For years he had tried to forget her, but it was impossible. Their love was older than the city itself, buried deep in the river of time, untouchable by the passage of years. Eve, Adam finally spoke, his voice rough and low. Why have you come back? You know why, Eve replied with a gentle laugh. Time hasn't changed us. I've been in Tanzania long enough. It's time to see an old friend. Adam didn't respond. His emotions swirled in a confusing mix of joy at their reunion and pain that he couldn't quite express. Eve's return had reignited a fire deep within him, burning away the isolation he had tried so hard to cultivate. Hours later, as the night deepened and the city grew quieter, a dark figure stepped out of an unremarkable taxi and quietly made its way to the old mansion. Eve's presence remained as graceful and mysterious as ever, her eyes gleaming with wisdom and compassion under the moonlight, as if she could see through the veil of the world. She stood at the door and knocked 3 times, her touch light. The door swung open on its own, as if it had been waiting for her. Adam stood in the doorway, and when their eyes met, it was as though time had pulled them back to the night they first met. Eve, Adam murmured, almost to himself. You've changed. We both have, Eve replied, stepping closer and gently touching his cheek. But we're still the same. They said nothing more, quietly walking into the house together. The familiar atmosphere returned to the mansion as though time had reversed, bringing back all the years they had shared. Adam's fingers found the piano keys once more, and this time, the melody was no longer one of loneliness, but the harmonious echo of 2 eternal souls reunited. The nights in Detroit were as silent as ever, with only the occasional gust of wind and the distant wail of a siren disturbing the calm. Since Eve had returned to Adam's side, it was as if they had rediscovered the years they had lost. Adam began composing music again, while Eve immersed herself in her endless collection of books, as if everything had returned to how it once was. But they both knew that this peace was nothing more than the calm before the storm. During this time, Adam and Eve often took late-night walks through the city's ruins, reflecting on the changes in human society and the decline of culture. Detroit, once a giant of industry, had now become an abandoned dream, filled with decay and desolation. The fate of this city seemed to mirror the long centuries they had lived through, once glorious, now reduced to ruins, exuding a persistent sadness. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Eve asked softly, gently holding Adam's hand. "I do," Adam replied, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Back then, Detroit was still thriving, full of life and hope. Music flowed through the city as if the air itself was filled with melodies. And now," Eve's gaze wandered over the empty streets, "all that's left is silence and oblivion. It's like humanity's creativity is slowly fading as they get lost in a mire of materialism and desire." Adam nodded, feeling the deep sense of loss in Eve's words. As immortals, they had witnessed the rise and fall of countless cultures, seen the peaks of art and thought, and watched those civilizations crumble. Now it seemed even they were losing their way in this endless life. Just when they thought this peaceful existence might last, a sudden knock on the door shattered the calm. Eve frowned slightly, sensing a familiar yet unsettling presence. Adam felt a wave of unease rising within him as he slowly walked to the door and opened the heavy wooden entrance. Standing on the doorstep was Eve's sister, Ava. She stormed into their lives like a whirlwind, with a mischievous smile and a glint of trouble in her eyes. Ava was the complete opposite of Eve, reckless, impulsive, and always ready to challenge any rule, which was exactly what Adam feared most. "Ava," Eve's voice carried a hint of reproach. "How did you find us?" "I just wanted to see my sister," Ava replied with a light-hearted smile, "and see how you two are doing." Adam observed Ava without saying a word, his unease growing. Her sudden appearance hinted at the trouble that always seemed to follow her. Years ago, Ava's reckless actions had brought them immense problems, and now her unexpected visit suggested that something bad was about to happen. Eve forced a small smile and invited Ava inside. The sisters exchanged pleasantries, but Ava's excitement sharply contrasted with Eve's calm demeanor. Ava was fascinated by everything in Detroit, constantly asking questions and probing into Adam and Eve's lives. "This city is so intriguing," Ava said, leaning against the window and looking out at the night scene. "I wonder what the nightlife here is like. I've heard there are some wild parties. I wouldn't want to miss them." Eve knew Ava's nature all too well and feared that her recklessness would once again lead to disaster. She tried to convince Ava to stay at the mansion, but Ava was clearly not interested in listening. "Sister, you're so old-fashioned," Ava laughed, her expression innocent and carefree. "You've been living in this rundown house all this time. Don't you get bored? Come on, let's go enjoy the night in this city." Adam finally couldn't stay silent any longer. His voice carried a note of warning. "Ava, this place isn't what you think. There are many dangers here, especially for us." But Ava just laughed it off, waving her hand dismissively. "Danger? That's what makes life fun, isn't it?" Despite their unease, Adam and Eve knew that once Ava made up her mind, there was little they could do to change it. Reluctantly, they agreed to Ava's suggestion, and the three of them headed to an underground club in Detroit, one of the few places in the city where nightlife still thrived. Inside the club, the air was thick with deafening music, and the flashing neon lights illuminated the faces of the frenzied crowd. Ava thrived in this environment, dancing wildly and losing herself in the chaos and passion of the night. Adam and Eve kept their distance, watching everything with growing concern. As the night wore on, Ava's behavior became increasingly erratic. Her gaze finally settled on a young musician named Ian, who was sitting alone at the bar, looking lonely and melancholy, out of place in the noisy environment. Ava approached him, speaking softly, like a predator luring its prey. Adam noticed what was happening, and his heart tightened. He quickly moved toward them, trying to stop Ava from doing something reckless. But he was too late. Just as he was about to reach them, Ava suddenly bared her fangs and lunged at Ian's neck. Blood spurted out instantly. Ian's face twisted in terror and pain, but he barely made a sound before losing consciousness. Adam watched in horror, his heart growing cold. He knew that the situation had spiraled out of control. When Eve arrived, she could only stand and watch as Ava released Ian's lifeless body, which slumped to the floor, blood pooling around it in a gruesome stain. The club's wild party continued as if nothing had happened, no one noticing the tragedy that had just occurred. But Adam and Eve both knew that Ava's actions had caused a huge problem for them. They needed to deal with Ian's body quickly and cover up the incident, or the consequences would be disastrous. Amid the noise and chaos, Adam felt a deep sense of despair. He realized that Ava's arrival had not only shattered their peaceful life, but had also dragged them back into a world filled with danger and uncertainty. The shadow of unease was swiftly consuming the little peace they had left. As the night deepened, the atmosphere outside the underground club in Detroit grew heavy and oppressive. Adam and Eve hurriedly pushed Ava out of their lives, knowing all too well that her presence, despite being Eve's sister, would only bring more trouble. As Ava's figure disappeared into the night, she left behind a silence that was thick with unease. Inside the club, Ian's body lay cold on the floor, his blood having already congealed, as if time itself had frozen. Adam and Eve knew they had to act quickly to deal with the body. Otherwise, the danger would inevitably catch up to them. They moved swiftly, silently transferring Ian's body to a rusting truck in the alley behind the club. The back of the truck reeked of decay, and Eve wrinkled her nose at the stench, but she knew it was their only option. Adam shut the truck door with a heavy thud, and the two exchanged a glance filled with unspoken pain and guilt. They had seen death many times before, but this time, the weight of it seemed unbearable. "This shouldn't have happened," Eve whispered, her voice laced with anger and sorrow. "Ava never learned to control herself. She never cared about the consequences," Adam replied coldly. "She only thinks about her own desires. And now we have to pay the price for her actions." They drove to the outskirts of the city, eventually burying Ian's body in a deserted industrial area. The place had long been abandoned, overgrown with weeds, with rusting machinery scattered like tombstones in a forgotten graveyard. The two worked in silence, each burdened by their own heavy thoughts. When they returned to the mansion, Adam and Eve were engulfed in a profound silence. Every nightfall brought a thicker, more oppressive atmosphere into the house, as if all their memories and pain echoed through the stillness. Eve sat quietly by the window, gazing at the distant city lights, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She had once believed she could escape these shadows, but now she was forced to confront the reality she could no longer avoid. A few days later, Ian's disappearance began to attract attention. As a moderately well-known musician, his sudden absence quickly caused a stir in the music scene. The media started reporting on the case, and the police soon got involved, launching an investigation. Among the Detroit police was a seasoned detective named Detective Collins. Though young, Collins had extensive experience in solving cases, especially those that seemed impossible. His eyes were sharp and his mind was quick, always finding cracks where others saw none. When Detective Collins began investigating Ian's disappearance, his instincts told him that this was no ordinary missing person case. After days of interviews and digging, he discovered that Ian was last seen at the underground club. Collins delved deeper into that night's events and quickly noticed some unusual details. The club's surveillance footage was grainy and unclear, but even so, Collins picked up on a peculiar couple, Adam and Eve. Their arrival coincided with Ian's disappearance, and the woman's striking beauty and presence were impossible to ignore. Collins's professional intuition told him that these two were hiding something. As the investigation deepened, Collins uncovered more and more suspicious details. Adam and Eve seemed not to belong to this era. Their backgrounds were vague, as if they had never existed in this world. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve could feel the invisible pressure building, like a massive net slowly tightening around them, pushing them closer to the abyss. "We can't keep going like this," Eve said one night, her voice heavy with worry. "Collins is already suspicious. Our time here might be running out." Adam was silent for a moment, knowing she was right. Since Ava's incident, their lives had been irreparably disrupted. The laws and morals of modern society seemed to be hunting them down, cornering them in a trap they couldn't escape. "Maybe we shouldn't continue to exist in this world," Adam murmured, his voice tinged with an indescribable weariness. "We've lived too long, seen too much suffering and decay." Eve's eyes were deep and contemplative. She understood Adam's pain, his growing disillusionment with the world. But despite sharing those feelings, she couldn't bring herself to easily give up on their immortal lives. "We can't give up so easily, Adam," Eve said softly, gently taking his hand. "No matter how much the world changes, our existence still has meaning. Maybe we just need to find a new way to face this unease and loneliness." The nights in Detroit were still shrouded in a thick, oppressive haze. as if even the moonlight refused to pierce the heavy clouds. Inside the mansion, the air was dense and stifling, as though every inch of space was filled with an invisible pressure. Adam and Eve could both feel it. Time was closing in on them, leaving them with fewer and fewer options. Detective Collins' investigation was like a sharp blade, slowly cutting into their lives. His relentless pursuit made Adam and Eve feel trapped, with nowhere to run. As Collins dug deeper, their identities became increasingly precarious. Every detail could expose their secret, and once it was revealed, they would face endless pursuit and judgment. "We have to leave." Eve finally broke the silence, her voice filled with determined resolve. "Detroit isn't safe anymore. Collins won't stop, and we need to find somewhere more hidden." Adam stood at the window, silently gazing out into the night. His eyes seemed to penetrate the darkness, seeing every corner of the city, even the memories buried in history. This city had once been his refuge, but now it had become an invisible cage, trapping him and Eve inside, with no escape. "We've been running for too long," Adam finally spoke, his voice heavy with exhaustion and resignation. "Whenever danger gets close, we always choose to leave, to find another hiding place. But that's not solving anything, Eve. We can't keep running." Eve paused, understanding Adam's pain and struggle, knowing his deep desire to fight against fate. But she also knew that their enemy wasn't just Collins. It was the world's hostility and lack of understanding toward them. "You want to fight against fate," Eve said softly. "But do you realize how dangerous that is? We're no longer the beings who could easily change the world. This world doesn't belong to us anymore." "Maybe it never did," Adam replied quietly. "But I don't want to be a coward who runs from reality. If we keep running, we'll never break free from this fate. Maybe it's time to end this." Eve felt the determination and despair in Adam's voice. She knew he was no longer willing to continue their immortal life. What once granted them endless time and freedom had now become their greatest shackle, binding them to a world that no longer belonged to them. "What do you want to do?" Eve asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "We have to face Collins." Adam turned to Eve, his eyes burning with rare resolve. "No matter what happens, we can't keep running. If he discovers our secret, we'll end this on our own terms." A deep fear rose in Eve's heart. She understood what Adam meant by end. But she also knew they had no other choice. Collins's pursuit wouldn't stop, and their existence could no longer remain hidden. As they discussed their plan, the sound of car engines suddenly broke the silence outside the mansion. Adam and Eve's eyes immediately turned toward the window, where they saw several unmarked black vehicles pulling up in front of the mansion. The doors opened, and several plainclothes officers quickly stepped out, led by Detective Collins himself. "He's here!" Eve's voice carried a hint of alarm, but more than that, there was a calm acceptance. "He's found us." "Then let him come." Adam clenched his fist, his eyes flashing with a fierce determination. "We won't run anymore." They moved quickly, gathering a few essential items, then stood together in the hall, waiting silently for Collins's arrival. The footsteps outside grew closer, like the tolling of a death knell. The door creaked open, and Detective Collins entered with a few officers. His gaze was sharp and cold, as if he could see through every secret hidden within the mansion. "Adam, Eve," Collins's voice was low and authoritative. "You know there's nowhere left to run." Adam looked at Collins, his eyes void of fear, filled instead with a resigned calm. "You don't understand, Collins," he said quietly. "Some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." "Let me be the judge of that," Collins responded coolly. "Whatever you're hiding, I'll uncover it." Eve slowly stepped forward to stand beside Adam, her expression as gentle and unwavering as ever. "We've run before, but this time, we're choosing to face it." Her voice was soft yet powerful. "Collins, do you even know what you're chasing?" Collins frowned, a sense of unease creeping into his mind. He didn't understand why this seemingly ordinary couple was so calm, but he knew he was on the verge of uncovering something significant. At that moment, Adam made a sudden decision. He turned and walked to the old grand piano in the corner, sitting down and resting his hands lightly on the keys. As his fingers began to play, a haunting melody filled the room. A final composition he had written for Eve, filled with sorrow and finality. Eve stood beside him, closing her eyes to absorb the music's power. She knew this was their last moment, their final choice. They would no longer run, but would instead end this chase on their own terms, whatever the cost. Detective Collins stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening, but he could feel a profound sadness and strength in the music. It seemed to draw him into a deep, inescapable dream, as if he was trapped in a fate he couldn't escape. As the last note faded into silence, the room fell still. Adam and Eve exchanged a look filled with deep love and understanding. In that moment, it was as if their lives had reached a final point. Suddenly, Eve reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial of an ancient potion, their ultimate means of escape. Without hesitation, she handed it to Adam, and together they drank it. Detective Collins moved to stop them, but it was too late. The potion took effect quickly, and Adam and Eve's bodies began to weaken. They slowly collapsed into each other's arms, their eyes still filled with peace and contentment. "You," Collins stammered, unable to grasp what he was witnessing. "We chose our own fate." Eve's voice was faint, but resolute. "Collins, don't try to uncover every secret. Some things you'll never understand." As the last bit of life faded from them, Adam and Eve's bodies slowly turned to dust, merging with the ancient mansion. Collins stood there speechless, knowing that the truth he had been chasing had vanished into the river of time, never to be reclaimed. The night outside remained dark, but now the Detroit sky seemed to be wrapped in an indescribable calm. Adam and Eve's choice had ended their suffering, closing the final chapter of their story. In that silence, their souls finally found true peace. The night was deep, and Detroit's sky was covered with thick clouds, as if mourning for what was about to happen. Inside the mansion, Adam and Eve's forms had begun to fade, turning into dust that seemed to blend with the ancient land beneath them. Yet in this moment of silence, a faint light flickered within them, a persistent spark of their longing for life and love, refusing to be extinguished. As time passed, Adam and Eve's awareness started to blur. They felt the weight of their bodies fading away, as if they were about to dissolve into the river of time. They had believed that this release would bring a peaceful end, but in their final moments, a surge of powerful emotion overwhelmed them. A profound love for each other, a deep attachment to life, and an unquenchable desire for the future. Eve's eyes fluttered open, revealing a trace of confusion. She turned to look at Adam beside her and saw that he was gazing back at her. Their eyes met in a shared understanding, a connection that words could not express. Though they had decided to end their immortal lives, in that fleeting instant before their final breath, they realized they had never truly let go of their love for each other and their yearning for life. "Adam," Eve's voice was weak but filled with emotion. "Do we really want to give this all up?" Adam looked at her, and the struggle within him intensified. He had once thought immortality was a curse, but now he found he couldn't let go so easily, not when he was by Eve's side. They had experienced countless years together, witnessed the rise and fall of human history, and through it all, their love had never waned. "Eve?" Adam hesitated, searching for the right words. But before he could speak, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly interrupted their thoughts. The door burst open, and Ava appeared in the doorway. Her face was etched with urgency and guilt, as if she finally understood the gravity of her past actions. She quickly rushed to Adam and Eve's side, her eyes filled with sorrow as she saw their bodies gradually fading. "You can't end it like this." Ava's voice was firm as she pulled out a small vial from her pocket. It was a rare antidote capable of reversing the effects of the mysterious potion they had taken. "You don't understand, Ava," Eve whispered. "We can't adapt to this world anymore. Ending it might be the best choice. But you still have each other. You still have love." Ava shook her head, her voice pleading. "You taught me about love and responsibility, and now you're going to abandon them? This isn't the ending you deserve." Adam and Eve exchanged a look, their internal conflict and doubts reaching a peak in that brief moment. They had made up their minds to embrace the end, but Ava's sudden arrival made them question their decision once more. The balance between love and life seemed to waver before their eyes, waiting for them to make their final choice. "There's still a chance," Ava continued to urge them. "We can leave here, go somewhere no one knows us, and continue our lives, continue searching for the meaning of it all." A ripple of emotion stirred in Eve's heart. She knew that Ava's words had touched the softest part of her soul. She looked at Adam and saw the same hesitation and inner turmoil reflected in his eyes. Maybe their lives weren't truly over. Maybe they still had a chance to find their own answers in the endless stretch of time. Finally, Adam nodded slowly, a deep resolve shining in his eyes. "Maybe you're right, Ava," he said. "Maybe we shouldn't give up so easily." Ava smiled with relief as she handed them the antidote. Adam and Eve drank it together, feeling their weakness gradually fade as they were pulled back from the brink of death. Although the future was still uncertain, a new hope had begun to blossom in their hearts. As their strength returned, Adam and Eve felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer the lost and helpless beings they had been moments before. They had rediscovered their love for life and their deep affection for each other. With Ava's help, they quickly packed a few essentials, deciding to leave the mansion that had once been their sanctuary and set out in search of a new haven. Under the cover of night, the three of them disappeared into the city's horizon. They didn't know what awaited them, but they understood that the journey of life continued, and their story was far from over. As their footsteps faded into the distance, the mansion returned to its quiet state, as if nothing had ever happened. But the echoes of Adam and Eve's love and life would forever resonate through the river of time. Wherever they went, these echoes would follow, becoming an inseparable part of their immortal existence. Under the vast, deep night sky, their fates intertwined once more as they continued their endless journey of wandering and searching.